the honourable member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And once again, I'm always grateful to be here speaking in the House on behalf of the constituents of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. But more importantly, for all those law-abiding firearms owners out there right across the country, in particular those veterans, those in the military, those in our law enforcement, sport shooters, and even our parliamentary protective services. I am disappointed to be once again speaking here under time allocation. When I spoke to this bill at second reading last year, it was under the same time allocation restrictions. I highlighted my speech then really on three key factors: basing any dialogue or debate around this bill around data and facts, being open and transparent to Canadians, and ultimately for respect to our firearms owners. And underlying all of that, I highlighted the need for education to the general public and to parliamentarians. So for the sake of transparency and to help educate all MPs and all Canadians listening tonight, let's review the history of how we got here, where we are here at third reading via the data and the facts. So first off, we've heard the term, it's been used already tonight a few times, the term assault weapon or military-style assault weapon. I've been trying for 3 years, Mr. Speaker, to get an answer from that. The government's own commission report from Hill Knowlton, which is on the public safety website, actually talks about it. It talks about the data that my fellow colleague spoke about, where the vast majority of over just shy of 200,000 respondents don't support handgun ban at all, but in particular it talks about the need to define what they mean when they say military-style assault rifle. And that's what the report says. When I asked the government that in writing, they said, oh, look at this report. The report says the government better define it. Here we are, umpteen years later with no definition. And I've been trying with every tool at my disposal as a member of Parliament. The data on when it comes to gun crime, it is 85+% of crimes committed with guns are done illegally. It's not done by law-abiding firearms owners. In fact, law-abiding firearms owners are 3 times less likely to commit any crime compared to an average Canadian. So I find it very, very frustrating for us here to be debating a bill that's targeting the wrong demographic. We should be focusing on criminals, not law-abiding firearms owners. So anyway, this bill was brought forth last June as a handgun freeze, which ultimately the government did through regulation last October. There was another couple components to it. It did talk about making the airsoft, these paint guns, for lack of a better, easier term for the community, illegal. And as well, it talked about bringing in enhanced red and yellow flag laws. Unfortunately, the bill, once it got to debated in the fall, it didn't take long to actually, the government already used time allocation again to get it through second reading, get it to committee, and then the study at committee, where loads of time was taken up with testimony, going through, experts were brought in to refute and support, or apparently support, the government's legislation in some ways. However, in the end, funny enough, all the testimony that was brought in around the airsoft, it's like, well, whoa, why are you going after this community? They're not the problem. And even though the red and yellow flag laws, I think there was actually somewhat unanimous consent initially that the intention was correct by the government. We in fact heard from the vast majority of women's groups that in fact this was going to make things worse and more difficult for them to actually get a response from law enforcement and for their own safety. Right. And don't just take my word for it, Mr. Speaker. Let's quote Ms. Rajan from Poly-Sicivien. Quote, "There is not one women's group that asked for this measure," unquote. Another quote from Louise Rondeau from Regroupement. Quote, "We find this measure not only unnecessary, but might even be counterproductive for victims. We recommend the clauses which introduce the red flag measures be removed from the bill," unquote. Anyway, we got through that, so it was getting pretty evident to the government that the whole purpose behind this bill and the two of the elements didn't even make sense and likely weren't going to survive. So what did we see happen next? At the last minute, table dropped hundreds and hundreds of amendments including the infamous G4 and G46, which went after the vast majority of hunters and farmers' semi-automatics, rifles and shotguns right across this country, which obviously created great uproar. Before I forget, Mr. Speaker, I am splitting my time with the member from Lévis-Lotbinière. So, look, what happened, and I know we had the chair of the committee just speaking before me, we automatically challenged the whole idea of going after law-abiding firearms, hunters, shotguns, and rifles, that it was out of the scope of the bill. It wasn't what we debated. Unfortunately, the chair ruled that it was within scope. We challenged it. Unfortunately, the member from the NDP party supported that it was in scope, which then created the great uproar because we couldn't kill this the minute it was tabled. And this went through where we saw the Assembly of First Nations, many Indigenous groups, the vast majority of hunters, farmers, even sports icons coming out in opposition to these last-minute amendments, and the backlash was great. Fortunately, we did see the NDP see the light. They changed tactics, and ultimately the Liberals themselves realized their mistake. To the point, though, they realized they were in trouble. They started filibustering the committee. In fact, the one Liberal member ate up 2 meetings alone talking about basic firearms 101, just to kill time as they tried to figure out how do they back themselves out of this situation that they put themselves in. We hit Christmas recess, Mr. Speaker. We got back in the new year. The committee then had to wait, I think, 6 weeks plus for the Minister of Public Safety even to show up and testify at committee, which he finally did just a few weeks ago in late April. Lo and behold, what do we see happen? Less than a week later, May 1st, the minister comes out. He's going to come forth with another new amendment that he's going to introduce to this bill, C-21, at the last minute, which was a new definition of prohibited firearms, just a day prior to the clause-by-clause review recommencing at committee. So obviously, members of the committee were very concerned. If I would have got a chance to ask the chair, I would have asked him if he thought there was any filibustering going on. We ate up 1 2-hour meeting asking officials some legitimate questions to make sure that this new definition of a prohibited firearm wasn't going to impact the hunters and sport shooters and law-abiding firearms owners right across the country. You've got to remember, we've already had the minister, or the prime minister, on public record saying he's going after some of the hunting rifles from our law-abiding firearms owners. I got to say, I was sitting at the committee that day. I was quite surprised by the NDP House Leader when he immediately started accusing the Conservative members of that committee of filibustering. In fact, the one meeting, 45 minutes into it, the Conservative members had talked for less than a minute, and the minister, or the member from the NDP, had spoken for more time than anybody else in that 45 minutes, complaining about somebody filibustering. Anyway, unfortunately, we are here where we are now at third reading, Mr. Speaker. I do have some good news to share with Canadians and with the members here in the House. I got an amendment through, which basically passed unanimously at committee, and it was an amendment to focus on providing the necessary resources, the ability for a licensed firearm owner to temporarily store their firearm with another licensed individual or business while they're dealing with the mental health issues. Because unfortunately, once they brought in the handgun freeze, in particular, you had a lot of veterans, people potentially dealing with PTSD, mental health across here, that they were afraid to turn or do anything with their guns, and they weren't going to seek the help because they didn't want to lose them full time. Some bad news, Mr. Speaker. The red flag laws, unfortunately, were supported by the NDP, and now we've seen so that did not get cut from the bill, and even now we see the minister or the prime minister, the government come out that they're going to use the Canadian Firearms Advisory Committee that they stopped using over 4 years ago to continue to target law-abiding hunters and farmers, rifles, and shotguns. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, let's just educate Canadians and focus the support on the root causes of gun violence in this country: crime, drugs, gangs, illegal trafficking of firearms, actual substantive bail reform, and most importantly, poverty, by going after our law-abiding firearms owners. Mr. Speaker, I'll be voting against this basically useless bill of C-21.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I congratulate the member for his amendment being passed. The committee worked very hard to do so. And it was great to have him substituting in here and there on the committee. It was a great help. I would note that the firearms, he mentioned that there's a problem with the definition of what is an assault-style firearm. I will agree that it needs work, and that is in fact the purpose of the Firearms Advisory Committee, to consult with sport shooters, with hunters, with Indigenous people, with people across the country from all walks of life that will help them to formalize a good definition of what an assault-style fire weapon is. And I certainly hope that he will contribute to that discussion.
The honourable member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. I'll contribute. In fact, I'll share a little history lesson for the member and for everybody here. Assault weapons have been banned in Canada since January 1st of 1978. As somebody that has carried actual assault weapons in theater of war, and there's not a single firearm out of the 1,500, now 2,000 firearms that have been prohibited through the May 1st OIC and subsequently through Order in Council and through the firearms program, that I, as a military member, would have ever purchased or helped define or take on, with the exception of a couple sniper rifles, which don't fit the definition that has been put forth. And I would correct the member. The term military-style assault firearm or assault firearm is not in the bill or anywhere in legislation that I'm aware of, not a single spot. The definition that has been brought forth is a new definition of a prohibited firearm. And the NDP member earlier even talked about the government already had the capacity to redefine what a prohibited firearm is just through regulation. The minister has that power, but ultimately, I'm confident with a future Conservative government, we will properly define firearms in this country.
Question commentaire.
The honourable member for Avignon, Lamitis-Matane, Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague concluded his speech by saying that he will be voting against C-21 because it's basically useless. I did appreciate my colleague's efforts to have an amendment adopted, an amendment that he proposed at the last minute. He came to sit beside me to talk to me about the amendment, to ask me whether I would vote in favor, and he saw that I'd written down that I'd be voting against it. He asked me why. He explained to me the reasoning for his amendment. He talked to me about those who struggle with mental health problems that they want to get treatment for, but they don't go get help for their mental illness because they're afraid that their firearms will be confiscated. And so his amendment was that people could temporarily give away their firearms while they seek mental health treatment. So he explained it to me, and I accepted to vote in favor of his amendment. He explained it to all colleagues. We all understood it and voted unanimously in favor of it, and it will help many people. So now I think it's surprising that he's saying this bill is useless or won't do anything. Now, of course, we need to do more to combat firearms trafficking, and there is more to do in other regards too. But I'd like him to say that there is something, at least one positive thing in this bill, and that he contributes.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Look, I won't argue. My amendment is a very good amendment, and I do appreciate the support that we got. And in fact, as I said in my speech, the NDP amendment to remove the airsoft portion was a good amendment too. But the best amendment would have been to actually get rid of the handgun freeze in the first place. Then I wouldn't have needed my amendment, because that's what's created the problem, is that we have the 3 times less likely to commit a crime demographic in Canada, restricted firearms owners, being penalized and targeted by this Liberal government, versus, to not allow them to actually legally use their firearms, etc. So that's why I needed the amendment, because I actually have a constituent who was going through a situation. He transferred, not temporarily stored, transferred his handguns to another. In fact, the guy works for the local law enforcement back in my riding, and now he's stuck. He sorted out his mental health issue or whatever the problem was, and he can't get his own handguns back. My point is, if that freeze hadn't have come into place, I wouldn't have needed to introduce my amendment. So just the fact that I introduced a necessary amendment to make the bill less worse does not make it a useful bill. It's still a useless bill.